Thank you guys. Welcome to Hashtag Murky Books and HSBC UK Futures. This event is a collaboration between HSBC UK and Hashtag Murky Books, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House set up in collaboration with Stormzy in 2018. Hello to those of you in the room and hello to those of you watching online. My name is Peigh Asante. I'm a creative director and community leader, and today I'm going to be in conversation with the lovely Rupal Patel. Rupal is a senior economic advisor at the Bank of England, where she has worked for over a decade on some of the biggest challenges facing the economy. Challenges including Brexit, COVID, Russian-Ukraine war, the LDI, and the recent high inflation crisis. Currently, she advises senior policymakers on decisions such as setting interest rates. Rupal is also currently the co-author of the international best-selling pop economics book, Can't We Just Print More Money? It's an introductory guide to the economy aimed at improving economic literacy, particularly amongst young people. Some of you in the room today, some of you watching online. She studied economics at the London School of Economics and the University of Nottingham. Rupal, welcome. Yeah, you can give her a round of applause for that. So I would love to just get straight into it and start by asking, what is money? And by that, I want to try and understand the origins of money, be it the medium of exchange, value, etc. Yeah, so in your words, what is money?
So that's a very big question. So money's been around since the start of civilization, and it's evolved as civilization has gone on to meet the needs of us, right? So money has been very different things over the years. It's been things like dolphin teeth,
Wow.
like chocolate, feathers, gold, some of you might know, banknotes, which are made out of paper, now made out of plastic. And, now all we do is tap our plastic cards or our watches. That's all considered money. So it really makes it seem that anything can be money.
Right.
And that's sort of true, but not entirely. So economists think that for something to be money, any object has to have three different things going for it. So number one, it has to hold its value day in, day out, right? So something can't be worth £5 today, but £2 tomorrow. It needs to hold its value. So, for example, if I wanted to, buy your trainers off you,
Yeah.
and you were like, okay, I'll take some bananas. I'll take 10 bananas today, right? That's fine. You might take 10 bananas, but, in 3 days' time, those bananas can go moldy. They're not going to hold their value. You're not going to be able to use them to buy more things or even eat them. And so that's not, not great. It's perishable. But food has been used in the past as money. Well, tea. So in China, bricks of tea were considered money because tea doesn't really go off.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing that money needs to do is be a medium of exchange. So it means that it can be used again to buy something else. So again, if I gave you bananas because you love bananas, someone else might not want bananas. If you want to buy, your dinner with bananas, I don't know what you're going to have, like a pizza or something.
Yeah.
Someone else isn't going to accept those because they might want, I don't know, some toast or something. And so it needs to be a medium of exchange, something that someone else can use to buy something from someone else. The last one is called a unit of account. It means everything is priced in that, in that price. So everything now, in the UK anyway, is priced in pounds. So you know how much it's worth. You can compare prices with different objects, different things. So that's, those are the three things. But ultimately, as I said, most things can be money as long as they hold those three things. But everyone needs to believe it's money. It's all based on trust, really.
Right.
So if you trust something's money and everyone else kind of buys into that, that thing is money.
Okay. So the three things is exchange, hold its value, and the last thing was
Unit of account.
units of account. Okay, that's pretty cool. I mean, let's just dive straight into this. The title of your book is Why Can't We Just Print More Money? And that's exactly what I want to ask you next. Why is it that we can't print more money?
Well, the thing is, we can print more money.
Yeah.
We can always print more money. It's just not always a good idea to print more money.
Right.
So take, for example, say we did print loads of money and we gave everyone right here, I don't know, £200, right? That sounds great. You think you can buy more things because you've got more money now. But actually what happens is people realise that people have more money. and they might all want to buy the same thing. So we've come back to, sorry, your trainers again. Say everyone wants to buy that pair of trainers, right? What happens if all these people all of a sudden want to buy your trainers? What are you going to do? You're going to put your price up, right? So much so that actually that £200 isn't going to be worth much if your trainer's worth like £500 now. And so what happens is that in the whole economy, if you give a lot of people loads more money, people just put their prices up.
Right.
And that's what we call inflation. And inflation can be quite really kind of terrible for an economy and for the people in it. So inflation usually, at least at the Bank of England, we think should be around 2%. So that means prices are rising year in, year out, 2%. If it goes quite above that, that can be quite bad. So in the UK, last year, the year before, we had double-digit inflation. Now that's very rare for the UK. And you might have remembered the cost of living crisis. You might have seen the cost of like your food shop go up by quite a lot. And that means that you have less money to spend on something else. That's quite bad. Now that's in the UK. Some other countries have had something called hyperinflation, which is, triple-digit inflation. Really, it's really awful. And that means that really all the money you have can't even afford you a packet of crisps. So a good example, a recent example of this is in Zimbabwe in the early 2000s. They printed loads of money to pay off their debt. What happened was they had hyperinflation and they actually ran out of paper to print their money on.
Wow.
They didn't have enough. And so if you look at some of the old notes, actually, you'll see that they've reprinted on the same bit of paper with a different denomination. And a similar thing happened in Germany just after the First World War. They printed a lot of money to fund the war, and then found that basically there weren't enough things to buy and the price of those things started to go up. And so you might have seen pictures of people buying, loaves of bread with wheelbarrows of cash. So you never want to get into that state where you're printing too much money.
Right. So you see, really what I'm hearing is that you need to kind of control that, because if you don't, as a result of it, inflation and things will be going higher.
Yeah.
Okay. This next section that I want to talk about is how economies actually work. But before we get into that, I would love to understand, by your definition, what is economics?
Very good question. So economics, for a lot of people, they might think about, maths, like money, men in suits, and that's sort of part of it, but it's not everything. Now, for me, I think economics is about, how we interact with each other, how we interact with businesses, and how that kind of all fits together. I think of economics as a way of answering problems and, not only just personal issues, but also global things. So it can help you really make sense of whether you should stay in education, like go to university or get a job or start an apprenticeship, or it can help you solve things like climate change as well. It also helps you understand things, in the news. So like why a war halfway across the world means that you might not be able to go like on a holiday this year.
Right. What I want to actually talk about next is about supply and demand, and what that is. Could you kind of give an example of what supply and demand is?
Yeah, so supply...
And how it happens as well.
Yeah. So supply and demand is the most important concept in economics, at least for me. It's a foundation of kind of how the economy works in some way. And it's very intuitive, it's very simple. So demand is really how much you want something. That's based on quite a lot of things, but ultimately it actually comes down to the price of things, really. And so when the price goes up for something, normally you want less of it because you can't afford it as much. And you might actually decide not to buy it at all and buy something else. So, I don't know, for example, take Xbox, right? If Xbox games went up by quite a lot, you might pay, for a few months maybe, you might put up with the higher price. But eventually you might go, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to buy Xbox games anymore. I'm going to switch to buying PlayStation games and buy PlayStation instead. And then, then maybe Xbox might realise that no one's going to pay their high price and they might bring it down a bit. That's how kind of demand works. Supply is how much of a business makes of something or wants to make of something. And that depends on, firstly, how much it costs them to make things. So if it gets really expensive to make video games, they might stop. They might continue if they know that, you're willing to pay that price for it. as well. Now, when demand and supply meet, so, when, say, for example, Xbox go, how much is an Xbox game these days, by the way?
I couldn't tell you. I'm going to say around £50.
50. Let's say 50. Did you say 50? £50. So let's say £50. Say they go up to £60. So you might go, yeah, sure, I'll pay £60. And Xbox might go, oh, great, we can sell this for £60. We'll carry on making this game. Yeah. But if their costs go up by quite a lot more and they have to charge £80, you might go, that's way too much. And then you'll stop buying it and they'll stop making it. And so it's really important. It keeps kind of prices in check in some ways as well.
Okay. So just to kind of simplify it, would you say that if demand is driven by the cost of something, so if something is too expensive, the demand goes down, I don't want it anymore, what would you say supply is driven by?
It's also prices. It's a cost of something, right? So if it costs too much to make something, it's just too difficult. So we had a bit of an increase in energy prices recently, right? That affects lots of things like gas and oil. It needed to make a lot of things. If it gets too expensive to buy gas and oil, then businesses close down and stop making things as well.
Okay. That kind of leads me perfectly onto my next question, which is about the importance of economic growth. And for those in the room and watching online, could you please explain to us what it is and why it's so important?
So economic growth is very important kind of concept for us all. Because really it determines the quality of your life. Really, your quality of life improves as the economy grows. Right. So if you think back, I don't know, to about 50 years ago in the 1970s, most households maybe had one car, one TV. It was rare for you to go on holiday, really. It was a massive deal. As the economy has grown over the last 50 years or so, it means that, we all have more than one TV in a household because we all kind of have smartphones, which is basically a TV these days. Maybe each household will have more than one car. One person might have a car. And going on holiday is less rare. More people go on holiday each year than they used to. And that's all because of economic growth. If you think about the economy as like a cake, right? And each slice kind of is what you'd get from the economy. As an economy grows, that slice gets bigger. And what you want year on year is to at least keep the slice of cake you get the same or even bigger. And that's what economic growth is. So
is it fair to say that economic growth has a positive impact on our personal lives?
Most of the time, yes. So normally it does mean that you'll be able to buy more things and people will make more things for you to buy as well. But it can mean, worse things for some people, depending on how an economy grows, is it can cause inequality.
Right.
So there could be times where economies grow, but some people get better off, but some other people get worse off. Now, an example of this could be, we've seen in supermarkets over the last few years that, cash points have been replaced by those automatic kind of scanners, which I get really frustrated at because they're quite hard sometimes to use and things like that. But whenever you get one of those, it might mean that someone has lost their job. And that's not great for that person. So it might be great for you because you've got to spend less time queuing. It's better for, the business because they don't have to employ that person. It's much cheaper to get a machine. But actually that person might have lost their job. But another way of thinking about it is that person might then be trained to become like a manager of the store instead of just behind the till. And that could be better for them because it might mean that they've got, a bigger salary, more responsibility, that sort of thing. They're skilled up. And so it really depends on how economies are growing.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So we've kind of spoken about what economies are. We've discussed how economics works. I'd love for us to discuss the role of government in the economy and the different ways in which the government can kind of influence the economy. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from you on that.
So government's really in charge of organising the economy and how it works. There are two really big things that the government are in charge of, and they spend a lot of time thinking about it. So one is spending and the other one is taxation. And there are different reasons. So the government spends money on behalf of everyone living in that economy. And the reasons they do that is because firstly, sometimes you as an individual just wouldn't spend that money on yourself. So a good example of it in the UK is the NHS. So the government spends a lot of money on the NHS because it knows that actually sometimes you wouldn't go to the doctors if you needed to, if you had to pay for it. So if you had a bad cold and you had to pay, I don't know, £100 to go, you might go, oh, I'll feel better in a week's time, I won't bother. But if it was free, you might go and get yourself checked out, and it might just be a cold, but it could be something worse, and it's good for that to be found earlier on. So that's one kind of reason they spend money. Another reason is just that no one can afford to spend that much money on things. So, building bridges, building tunnels, that sort of thing cost a lot, and no one, me or you can't spend that money, and it's good to spend it building something that's beneficial for everyone. Another thing is to redistribute money.
Right.
So for some, it might be to redistribute money to people who are less well off as well.
Okay.
And that all the spending actually means that you can grow an economy. It really helps with economic growth. Now, taxation is the other kind of opposite side of it. It takes money out of the economy, because you're literally taking money out of people's pockets and putting it into the government's pockets in some ways. And there are different reasons for taxation, the same way of spending. So one of the reasons you would tax something is to disincentivize that behaviour.
Right.
So we all know, things like cigarettes are really highly taxed in the UK, and so is drinking, alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you're less likely to buy it or even buy loads of it. Another reason is, again, to redistribute money. You might tax people who earn more to then redistribute that money to people who earn a bit less as well.
Okay, so it's on products, but also on wages and things like that as well, we can see.
Yes.
Okay. We've spoken about kind of the government and their role to the economy. I want to talk a little bit about central banks and, monetary policy. And in your words, I'd love to know, what is the role of a central bank?
Central banks, like the Bank of England that I work in, do loads of things. They store a lot of gold. So the Bank of England actually has the second biggest gold storage of any other country. And it's really the gold of other central banks and other governments, because we have these huge vaults in the city of London where it's all stored. And it's very, very deep and big and locked away. So that's one thing central banks do. Also, it's in charge of all the payments in the country. So every time you use your credit card, your debit card, and you tap, that all goes through the Bank of England to then go to your bank as well. Money is in the centre of central banking. It's really like the control of money and how it's kind of used as well and circulated around. Another thing that they do is keep bank safe, keeps your money safe in banks. So when you put your money in, NatWest or Barclays or HSBC, it makes sure that they don't do anything with that money that's reckless. So when you need it, you're able to get it out as well. But the most important thing I'd say central banks do is set interest rates. And this is to control inflation. We talked about, how inflation can run away really and get really bad, cause hyperinflation. And so by setting interest rates, it makes sure that inflation is at a good level. And interest rates are basically the rate at which you borrow money. It's like the value of money in some ways. And so if you were going to take out a loan to buy a car, if interest rates go up, it makes it more expensive for you to buy a car. And you might think that's really bad for you on a personal level, and it might be, but it slows down how much, your car dealership can charge you for that car. And if you do that at an economy-wide level, bring prices down. Also, if you're a saver, you're more likely to put your money in your savings account and have that for when, prices go down. Or, even if prices stay high, you're able to afford that car later. And it's the other way around as well.
I would love to understand, how are interest rates set? Where do they get the figure? Where do they say, right, okay, this is going to be 8%, this is going to be 10%, this is going to be 5%. How is that figure set? How do you land on that figure?
So there's only one interest rate. It's called the bank rate. It's the Bank of England kind of base rate, which then other banks will set their interest rates based on. So if you go to HSBC for a loan, for example, they will that rate that you get is based on the Bank of England's interest rate. And the way that it's set is every few weeks, 9 people meet in a meeting room and discuss the economy. And they'll talk about things like how much do cars cost these days, how much is a pint of milk, all these sorts of things that you probably interact with and think about every day. And they'll go, that's looking quite high, isn't it? Which it has been for a long, long time, actually. And they'll go, maybe we'll put interest rates up to slow the economy, slow down prices. And then they'll reassess in a few weeks' time. and they might go, oh, actually, all these things are looking okay. And then they might keep interest rates the same. Or like they did actually earlier this year, they thought, oh, prices are actually looking, have gone down quite a lot. We can lower interest rates now. And so they'll keep resetting it depending on what the economy is doing.
Wow, that's fascinating. 9 people.
Yeah.
Wow. Are you one of those 9 people?
Unfortunately not.
No, but that is super, super interesting. That is how interest rates are set. That's something that I've always thought about, like how are they determined? Because obviously that has an effect on, personal finances and how one might use their personal finance, which leads me perfectly onto my next question, which is about personal finance and economic decision making. So in your opinion, I'd love to know, why is it important to kind of have a general understanding of economics, and how does it impact everyday life? I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love for you to expand on it.
Yeah, so economics really impacts a lot of the things you do. So, I said if you're thinking about after school, when you leave school, moving out of your family home, you might be thinking about renting, and you might want to think about how to save money for it and what you need to do. So when interest rates are high, for example, it's really good to save your money, right? You get a lot. You might put £100 in a year's time, you might get £120 out, right? And that's amazing. That's pretty much seems like free money in some ways if you store it with the right savings account. And so it can be quite important to understand how these things work. If you're going to buy a car and borrow some money, you want to know the interest rate which you're being charged for it. If it's really high, but your salary starts falling, you might not be able to afford it in a few years' time. And so it's good to know how these things kind of affect you day and, not just now, but also when you're making decisions in a few years' time.
Okay, so naturally these things have an impact on our everyday life.
Yeah,
more so than we believe.
The 9 people that are kind of setting interest rates have a much bigger impact on your day-to-day life than I think a lot of people realise.
Yeah, I'd love to ask for the people in the room and the people watching online, if you've got any kind of basic personal finance tips, tips around saving, investing, budgeting, have you got anything you could share for some of the people in the room and those watching online?
So I think, as I always say, educating yourself in learning about financial and economic literacy is very important. Even, you don't have to become an expert. You don't have to do it at A-level or at university or anything like that. But just understanding a bit about where you put your money and when you put your money there and how much can make a big difference, I think. And decisions when you're younger can affect you when you're older. So things like credit ratings, which is how a bank, assesses how risky you are to lend to, is really made up of information from when you're quite young, right? So, for example, if you're taking out a mobile phone contract, that will count as your credit history, which might follow you around when you're 30 years old. And so it's quite important to make wise decisions now so they don't hurt you in the future.
Yeah, that's something that I can attest to. I was one of those people who took out a mobile phone when I was kind of 17 years old, and it 10 years later when I was trying to apply for a mortgage, it had a negative impact on my credit score. So yeah, that's definitely something I can relate to. You're somebody who's worked in economics for 10 years, right? At the Bank of England. I would love to understand, and you spoke about the importance of understanding economics. I would kind of love to understand the current landscape of the industry. What's it been like in the last decade that you've worked there? Is it something that is a space of work where it's quite diverse in its nature? Can you expand on that a little bit?
So I'm sure the economy's been through quite a bit in the last few years. There's been quite a few shocks. You said at the beginning, the things that I've worked on. So it's always been a very interesting and exciting area to work in. And it's been quite, there are many jobs in economics as well, and also finance. It's really just kind of, it's the sort of thing that you don't really get bored of, and you can make a big career out of it. Yeah. But the thing is, the economics industry does have a bit of a diversity issue. It's really interesting. There was a competition to draw what children thought economists looked like, and all the drawings looked the same. It was all of an older man with glasses who looked like they were obsessed with money. And like, sadly, that's not, you know, an entirely misrepresentation of like economics as a field. There is an underrepresentation of like women, of ethnic minorities, and also those from kind of lower income backgrounds as well. And I really do think like economists are to blame for this. Like, economics has such a bad rep. It used to be called, well, it still might be called, the dismal science. Everyone thinks it's about maths and, you know, jargon. And it's because economists, you know, don't really translate how some things really impact people in their day-to-day lives. When you hear economists on TV, half the time, you know, I think a lot of people switch off because it just sounds really boring and dry, which is one of the reasons why, you know, me and my co-author Jack wrote this book, to show that economics can be more than just that, right? But the problem is that it does start at schools. So, you know, research has shown that twice as many boys will pick economics for A-level than girls. 3 times as many and privately educated children will choose economics at A-level than the state schools. And that means that few of those children will go on to study at university or even take up jobs in it, and they just don't think it's for them. So what's really important is that people learn about economics quite early on and become interested in it. And so you'll see those people taking careers in them. You might not think, you know, so what? Economics is not as diverse as we think it should be.
Yeah.
Thing is, economists make a lot of decisions that impact us.
Right.
Right. You know, quite a lot of decisions that really impact us are made by economists. So decisions like, where should we invest money? In which part of the country should we invest money? How much should student fees be? That sort of thing are all made by economists. Wow. And if those economists all come from a certain background, they might not think about how it might impact people from other backgrounds. Right. And so you might get decisions being made that aren't helping, you know, benefiting everyone. And so it's quite important that, you know, we get economics to a place where there are people from different backgrounds, so those decisions can, you know, involve those sorts of people and really benefit everyone.
No, that's very interesting, and that's good to hear that actually the more diverse we make those decision makers, the more diverse the decision making.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. And if there was people in this room or people watching online who were considering a career in finance and economics, what would kind of be the natural pipeline? Like, what would they do?
So
where would they start?
Where would they start? So I think start by asking questions, right? It doesn't have to be anything to do about finance or economics. I think even things like climate change, which I think a lot of people obviously have experience of and think about, and it's really easy to like learn more about it. I think asking those, you know, why do we have climate change? Why aren't we doing enough to stop it? And then thinking about the economics behind it. And that's the sort of way in to think, like, and it unravels a bit of this thread where you can start answering questions in a way that has like an economics framework. And the more and more you learn about it, I think the more interested you get, and you'll find different resources, right? Obviously, this is just one book to help you understand. There's loads of them. There's lots of podcasts available as well. There's lots of videos, things like that you can learn about it. Even if your school doesn't formally teach economics, there are other ways in.
Okay. So really look out for resources like your book and other resources online, and other ways in. You know, it could be climate change. It could be a number of different things. No, thank you. I mean, we've covered a lot today. You know, we've discussed the nature of money, how economics works, the role of government, the importance of personal finance. I'd kind of like this opportunity to kind of wrap the talk and thank you for your time and open up the floor for some questions. Okay, so let's have a round of applause for Rupal. And I'd like to open the floor for some questions. So has anybody got any questions? Yep, I think we have one over there.
What would you say is like the hardest thing when it comes to like writing a book or the story?
Great. So the question is, what would you say the hardest thing is when writing a book?
So Peigh and I were talking about this before this talk, actually. I think it's finding the time, because it's quite a creative process, right? And even though it's about economics, which, as I said, can be quite a dry subject, you've to make it a bit more creative, it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of time. And so setting enough time that you can meet your deadlines, because they come, you know, thick and fast, is important. And also thinking about the audience, right? So you want to make sure that someone actually wants to read this stuff. And so really stepping back all the time and going, would someone else actually want to pick this up and read it? And, sometimes you read what you've written, you think no. And then you've got to start again.
Amazing. So making it a bit palatable for people to understand, because of course you work in that, and so you understand it, but of course you're trying to communicate it to people who might not have an understanding of it. So that's a challenge as well. Okay, lovely. I think we have another one over there.
Yeah. So what inspired you to become an author?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what inspired you to become an author?
So I'm an economist through and through, and I never thought about writing a book actually. But I did see that there were a lot of people, across all different types of ages, all different backgrounds, that just didn't understand really simple things about the economy. And I found that quite shocking, actually, how people were going about their day-to-day lives with loans and they didn't know how they worked, really, or making big decisions like voting for different governments or things like in the referendum, and not really understanding what those decisions meant for them. And so that really helped to inspire this book, to give people a bit of a grounding, to help them make these decisions in a bit more kind of smarter way. And in particular, like the book's structured around 10 questions, which me and my co-author had actually been like asked quite a few times by our friends and family. Things like, what actually is money? Why are all my clothes made in Asia? Why am I richer than my great-great-grandmother? Like, these are questions that we were being asked, all the time. So it was quite nice to write it all down in a book.
Perfect. Thank you for your work. I think we have another one.
Do you always have to connect emotionally and socially to be able to write a good book?
Oh, good question.
That's a tough one.
In order to write a good book, do you have to kind of always connect to it emotionally when you're writing, and socially, or can you detach your emotions from it?
I think you do, right, in some ways. Again, it's the thing about thinking about who is going to read this and like, would anyone read it? And in that way, you've got to connect with your audience and think about, what do they want from this? Like, what would make them pick this up and, not just pick it up, but carry on reading till the end. And so in that way, you do have to connect with it in some ways. You can't just go, this is about economics and that's it. And I just want to get this information across. And I have to say, one of the most kind of beneficial and like most fulfilling bits about this book is seeing how others have like perceived it and getting their feedback from it as well. It's really nice, even if it's negative.
Amazing. You need the balance. Yes, we have another question there.
So obviously you're an economist. Did you find it hard to kind of fit in as in an economist, as is more of a male-dominated role as a woman?
Lovely. So you're an economist. It's typically it's a male-dominated space. Did you find that hard and difficult to kind of fit in that space?
So not really. I have to say I've been very, very lucky. So I have to say most teams I've worked in, it's been all men. But I've been very lucky that really everyone's taken, everyone is an economist first. And so everyone's been very kind, very supportive, and really values the work for your work, not, who it's come from in some ways. And obviously, occasionally it can be quite difficult, but not because I think people aren't trying. And, there's been a big push in economics recently as well to try and get people from different backgrounds, more women in particular as well. So I've never found it a barrier to working in economics, and I don't think anyone really should either, because at the end of the day, it's really interesting work, and that's what everyone's there for.
Brilliant. Yeah.
What would you say is the hardest thing about writing stories?
Okay, so the question is, what would you say is the hardest thing about writing stories, storytelling,
So I think it's making it relatable to your audience, right? So in this book, I've tried to include things that hopefully you guys will have heard of. There's bits about like the video game Fortnite in there, that we talk about Freddos, the little chocolate bars, Beanie Babies, which were big in the 90s. I'm not sure if they are now, but you might have heard about them. I think that's the sort of thing, like connecting and making sure that your reader understands the things that you're talking about. Is the hardest bit, I think.
Okay. So making sure it's relatable.
Yeah.
and it's connecting with the audience. Yeah, we've got another one.
What experience do you have advising people in my situation, in our youth era?
Okay, so through your lived experiences, do you have any advice that you'd give to these young people in the room and those watching online?
So I think number one is I think you're kind of, all the people here are going through their GCSEs at the moment, right? And you might be thinking about what to do next in terms of the subjects that you're going to pick. I think I remember when I was your age fretting about which subjects to do and which ones to drop and that sort of thing. I think it is important to think about what you might want to do after school and after that, and make sure you don't close any doors off, right? So pick subjects which you really, really enjoy, you know, and that you're good at and you want to get better at, but also making sure that you don't drop things, because that might mean that when you're 18 and you're thinking about what to do next, you know, someone doesn't go, oh, but you haven't studied this, so you can't do that. So I think making sure that you think ahead, but also always do what you enjoy.
So think ahead and always do what you enjoy.
Yeah, because otherwise you'll never be good at it if you do things you don't enjoy.
And I would always go back to our conversation earlier when you said about the decisions that you make now might impact you later on down the line. You know, I think that was a good piece of advice as well. So I would add to that as well.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more. Okay, yep.
So basically, what made you write that book called Can't We Just Print More Money?
Okay, so the question is, what kind of gave you the motivation to write the book? Why can't we just print more money?
So it was written during COVID, during the lockdown. So firstly, there's not much else to do during lockdown. Then you've got a lot of time to write back. But also it became very, you know, I was working at the Bank of England, still do, but it became very obvious that economics started, you know, mastering for everyone. You know, every day, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a press conference with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. He would say what was happening. And it became really obvious that economics wasn't just something that I did at work and that didn't impact people. And, you know, it became very relevant to people's lives. But again, I don't think there was this understanding of how relevant it was and what it meant for them. And so writing this book kind of helps people to do that a bit more, and just puts the economy in, you know, the forefront of people's minds.
Nice. So it had an impact on everyday lives, and she wanted to share that. One more? Okay. We've got one more.
You were speaking about the misconceptions of economists before and spoke about maths, so I just wanted to know, how good do you have to be at maths to become an economist?
Right. Okay. So the question is, how good do you have to be at maths to be an economist?
So there is this big misconception that economics is all about maths, and not just maths, like Greek algebra maths, right? Not the numbers either. And you don't have to be amazing at maths. I've seen a lot of people come up to me and say, I never did economics, even though I really enjoyed it and I'm really interested, because I'm bad at maths. I just thought I would never be good enough to take it on further. And I think that is such a bad misrepresentation of the subject, because economics is really about, as I said, how we interact with each other, how we interact with businesses. It's about behaviours in some ways. You don't need numbers or Greek algebra to understand it. So really, you don't have to be good at maths.
So yeah, you don't have to be good at maths to pursue a career in economics. Great. Thank you for your questions, guys. This has been a #Murky Books and HSBC UK Futures event. My name is Peigh Asante. This is Rupal Patel. Thank you very much.